Hello, this is Tim Law with Playing It Forward Coaching and Self-Reliance You. Always remember that you are essential in your life, your goals, your dreams, your career. Apply a combination of great wisdom over time. And a lot of these videos have to do with the interviews that I'm doing with individuals that are bringing a great deal of wisdom for teens and young adults. I am very, very pleased to have somebody I'm getting to connect with after many decades of not seeing each other. Gentleman from Hancock, New York, Dennis Elliot. So Dennis, welcome, and tell us about your story there a little bit, what you're doing, and great to have you.
Well, good evening. Broadcasting from sunny North Central West Virginia. I'm a 1978 graduate from Hancock Central. Lived in Hancock most of my life. Moved there when I was in second grade, when my mother married George Nearing. Most folks watching, if they have any connections to Hancock, remember George Nearing. That's my stepdad.
Sure, great guy.
We had a whole bunch of kids in our family. It's kind of a yours, mine, and ours. I ended up dabbling in all kinds of things in high school related to aviation. My biological dad was a pilot. And when my mom and dad separated and my mom remarried, he went on to work on his pilot's ratings. And so as a young man, I was exposed to airplanes on occasional visits. And let's just say it just was in my blood. So anyway, growing up in Hancock, we lived first out in Preston Park across from Mr. Scott Warby, in fact. And when we moved into the thriving metropolis of Hancock, New York, which to me was a big town, because where I was originally from was just a small little town just south of Utica. And I remember feeling like, I'd come to the big city. But as time went on, I kind of had a thirst for flying. And I wasn't a stellar student in high school at all. I think anyone who could watch this and say, you're doing what you're doing, which I'll explain in a minute, would probably be astounded. I've learned to never say never, that'll never happen to me, or I will never do that. I've been very careful about that. But essentially, I ended up growing up wishing I was able to get into a career field before I graduated. But I ended up learning to fly through an individual in town, Max Francisco.
Sure. Oh yeah, he's like a legendary pilot up there, Dennis.
Well, he's a legend, yes. But through that legend, he helped my dream come true by taking me to Kirkwood, New York, where he dropped skydivers and I took flying lessons. And that started when I was in, I'm trying to remember, I think probably 10th or 11th grade. So I didn't spread the word around. I worked at the Grand Union after school, and I became very interested in pursuing a career in aviation that looked, for a junior in high school, when you're soloed and flying an airplane, it looks like it might have actually been possible to make it. When I started the endeavor, I wasn't quite sure. I really didn't put a whole lot of faith in my making it in aviation. But I also had from an early ride in a helicopter to New York State Fair back when I was probably 9 or 10, it really impressed me with helicopters. So as I learned to fly airplanes, worked at the Grand Union, earning my my flying lessons, grocery bag by grocery bag, I begging rides to Binghamton, New York, ended up soloing in my junior year. And never did get my license. It was just really a logistical impossibility. But I knew that if I was going to continue the career and get into helicopters, which is what I wanted to do, I'd have to do it through the military. So senior year, I joined the Army on delayed entry. I hung around with some boys, Paul Gordon and Doug English, and the three of us ended up joining the military on delayed entry our senior years. I ended up joining as an enlisted man, becoming a helicopter mechanic. And while I was training, within a year of graduating high school, I ended up landing a spot in the Warrant Officer Flight Candidate Program, high school to flight school, basically. And
Wow.
from there, it was Katie bar the door. I went through flight training, graduating in the summer of 1980. First assignment was Alaska. They say you never get your dream location out of flight school. Well, I actually did. So I ended up in Alaska as a pilot flying Hueys out of Fort Richardson, Alaska. Met my wonderful wife of now a little over 38 years up there, and was up there on active duty for, trying to remember, probably 3.5 years. She and I moved to Alabama right after we were married with the Army. And I taught at the Army's Flight Training Center for a short time. And I got back out, and my heart called me back to Alaska and aviation, but an airline career seemed to be where to go. And I got into the National Guard as a weekend warrior pilot. So I kept my military affiliation and pursued commercial flying. And I worked for the next 3 years for 3 small airlines in succession. First one went bankrupt. Second one should have gone bankrupt. I almost met my maker 3 times there. Flew for another larger carrier for a while. The price of oil dropped and I lost my job. And I found myself flying for an airlines in Fresno, California. My precious wife was willing to pack up and leave her home. She was born and raised in Alaska. And she and I, with no kids, headed off to California. And I flew for a United Express carrier there for just about 7 years, all the while maintaining my affiliation with the National Guard. I was a weekend warrior Huey instructor. And after about 10 years in the airline industry, my 4th airlines was starting to have financial difficulties. I was a little bit gun shy because I'd been through this before.
Sure.
With 10 years in the airlines and feeling a little bit under fulfilled, maybe. Airline flying can get to be very routine. And I ended up making some choices. I ended up actually going to college because if you recall, I just went from high school to the Army to flight school. There was no college in there. So in my 30s, I went to a community college, took a leave of absence from my ailing airline job, got a 2-year degree, thought things over and decided that maybe I ought to do something other than fly for the airlines. So but just a little bit later, I ended up with an opportunity with my National Guard unit to come on active duty full time. And left my airline job. I ended up as the supervisor for our air cargo aircraft section. We had 2 air cargo airplanes and a bunch of pilots, and they needed someone to run the program. I never considered myself management material, but there I was. So I ran the C-23 program for a couple of years. We've serviced the entire western part of the United States with those cargo planes.
And what's the C-23?
That's a very ugly 30-passenger airplane the Army National Guard had. They had about 40 of them.
Okay.
And it's a 30-seat turboprop.
Okay.
And we traipsed all over the western United States, wearing oxygen masks and helmets, hauling people and aircraft parts. And I really liked it. I liked the diversity. As time rolled on, I had an opportunity to come teach at the schoolhouse, and the schoolhouse where they trained the pilots, the pilots that flew those airplanes for the Guard was located in Clarksburg, West Virginia. So I've lived on the West Coast for about 20 years from high school. I never lived back on the East Coast or anywhere near home. And by then we had 2 kids. I have a daughter and a son. And my son was, let's see, when I moved to Clarksburg, my son was 5. My daughter was 9. And I took a job back here. They invited me back to teach at the schoolhouse. I had another 12 years of active duty to finish off to get an active duty retirement. So I stayed at the schoolhouse, not really quite knowing how that would go, just doing years of training. I found that probably the most fulfilling thing, helping people become pilots in this
Yeah,
airplane.
that's what I wanted to ask you, Dennis. Love the story. What are some of the things you're looking for as far as these young people, perhaps, teens, young adults, whatever, that, that may want to get into the flight school, which I know you're doing one there in, West
Yeah.
Virginia now.
Yep.
What are some of the qualities that you're looking for? Because I know there's a lot of interest with, flying, and
There
what
is.
would you describe, some of the main traits or things you're looking for?
Well, one of the things, and I think what drove me, anyone that knew me in high school, I was sort of disengaged. I didn't play sports. I was in the band. I had a single focus. I don't know if that's really required, but I knew what I wanted, and I had inner drive to go do it. I guess maybe I was too stupid to quit. I kind of say that because
Persistence is good.
yeah, it was persistence. I would say if you really want, and that goes for anything, if you have this drive inside, don't stop at the first obstacle. I enjoyed most of the young military pilots at the Army's flight school that I taught at down in Clarksburg. That was rewarding, training the brand new pilots, the young ones right out of flight school, lieutenants and warrant officers. I just loved working with them. By then I had lost most of my hair and was all gray. And, it was like with this old CWO, he's been flying airplanes forever. And, and it was really good to rub elbows with these folks. I ended up staying on as actually a contractor after I retired for about 3 years. Mm-hmm. Then that went away. The Army's funding dried up. So I ended up teaching up at LaGuardia for Flight Safety International as a sim instructor through connections. Mm-hmm. And then out of the blue, I ended up at this little college, Fairmont State University, right here in my home.
Yeah. And that's where you are currently.
And that's where I am. And that's still teaching in aviation. I got asked, this is, anyone that knows me will say, you're teaching college? Yeah, I say that cautiously. I do teach college. I teach I don't have a PhD, but the dean and all the president, and they said, look, you've got 40 years of aviation experience. You have a PhD. So I teach aviation. I do flight evaluations still. And I see a lot of young folks that are driving towards something in aviation. And even those that don't, what I would just say, if you have drive, if you have interest, you have goals. Mm-hmm. And I would actually say, a lot of the students that come to us that I've encountered, not everyone ends up staying flying. We do have a degree program that doesn't include flying. It's an aviation administration degree. Mm-hmm. So Fairmont State University is one of those small little boutique schools that has this little aviation program where we have probably a total of 80 people. Uh-huh. We have 40 some odd of them flying at any one time. We just brought in some freshmen this past year. I think there was 18 of them that started flying. Not all of them have stuck with it. Mm-hmm. Of course, I'm an advisor, which is really a lot of fun. I would say one of the biggest things is the stick-to-itiveness, the professional curiosity.
Sure.
And that goes, what I find in aviation is that folks like the idea of complicated. I know people want to go to med school until they get to college and have to go through biology and chemistry for 3 or 4 years and heavy into the sciences. And then they decide maybe med school is a bridge too far. But I think the college thing is something they have to sort of sort out life as it comes. But you need drive. I don't care what your degree, what your life goals. You got to have some drive.
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of refer to it, the kids that I coach and everything, that internal engine, that fire, yes, that furnace. Again, I tell the kids, whether I was coaching them in wrestling or the guys or girls tennis, is you bring the desire to want to become better. And I said, we'll show you how to do it, but we can't provide that. That's an inside job, as you already know.
Yeah, and that's what we look for in the interviews, because we interview these young folks. We when I first came to the program, it was in shambles. I got hired because I couldn't find another aviation professor. And a friend of mine who I was in the military with that worked at the schoolhouse, was our former operations officer, was adjuncting for this college. And I was teaching in New York still part-time as a sim instructor and living in a crash pad in East Elmhurst on my, when I'd go up and work. And what I ended up discovering was that this school it wanted to put the aviation program back on its feet, but it didn't have any people. And I discovered that there wasn't that people lining up to go teach these kids. So he dropped my name to the dean. The dean reached out to me and said, what would it take to get you to leave your job up there in New York and come teach with us? And I kind of thought for about 2 seconds and said, sure, I'll take it. And I haven't looked back. It's one of those things where you're not quite sure how it's going to turn out. But I had done training my entire life pretty much.
Sure.
So I've been a flight instructor in the military since 1983. And I've conducted classes and taught in the classroom, taught in the airplane. So it was nothing new, but what was new was the clientele. They're young kids now, high school kids.
Right.
Basically, and young college people. Drive is the biggest thing. When we interview, well, I should probably tell you, the school needed I needed a full-time chief instructor, which I couldn't fill that role and teach on campus. One of my former coworkers in the military, who also is a retired Army officer or Air Force officer, Joel's boy was going to our program, and he'd mentioned to his dad that we were having a terrible time. We hadn't have any flight instructors. We were we were leasing aircraft from a company that was just hard to deal with. And so Joel called me up and he says, what's going on over there? And I said, buddy, I could use some help. And he came over, and within about a week, he was in the little airplane with me, which he hadn't flown in probably 20 years. And he came on and he has fire. Joel was a former Marine aviator turned Air Force pilot. And he and I worked closely together, although we were on opposite sides of the fence out of the same building. And we'd had about 16 years together. And I said, Joel, I think we can make this something more than just a silly flight school and a college program. We can develop these young folks. So we started interviewing for the flight positions. And up to that point, we hadn't interviewed. We just took anyone that said that they wanted aviation. And it was a lot of folks spent a lot of money and didn't finish. It takes drive.
Sure.
So I would say now in our interviews, we look for that inner fire. We ask the candidates, well, why do you want to do this? And often it's just because they think it's cool, but it has to be something more than that. And there's probably 20% that don't make it. They decide otherwise. But one of the things I enjoy doing is helping them find their way. Both Joel and I. Is we don't have to do this. I've got a military retirement. I retired as a Chief Warrant Officer 5 after 32 years. I don't need the job. And the university knows that Joel and I don't need the job, but it's the four of us. There's another guy that manages the flight program and another professor of aviation who is not a flight instructor. But there's four of us, and we're running a program of 80 in a small state school. But we do have fire, and we have some of the best students on campus. All of them have at least a 3.0 GPA.
Wow, good.
Because we enforce something. So we look for fire, we look for drive, we look for endurance. We talk about how to suffer failure. Because that happens. I've got some students that just don't do well in the flying part and the knowledge part of the flying, and it's tough on them.
Yeah.
So in the Army, we call that resiliency training. How do you bounce back? So what we look for is drive. And I tell these folks, I said, look, if airplanes aren't it for you, I don't care. I'll help you get where you want to go.
Sure.
If it's to be an architect, then let's go be an architect. If it's just getting out of college altogether and go learn a trade, then let's help you find that trade. I don't care if they're all pilots. None of my kids fly. My two kids have nothing to do with aviation, except my daughter did marry a young man remarry. I have a 7-year-old grandson from her previous marriage, but the guy that she is married to now was one individual whom I mentored as he came over, and he and his buddies came over to visit our aviation school there from the very college that I teach back in '04.
Okay.
He is a young man that I have stayed in touch with all these years. And David met my daughter about 4 years ago and told me, he says, I didn't know you had a daughter. And I said, well, I didn't know you were looking. So they're married. He flies for Southwest. And I said, well, I'd a whole lot more like the idea of you meeting my daughter back years ago, and maybe wouldn't have had a marriage that failed, but they live over pretty close to you, a lot closer to you than I do, over in Hedgesville, just south of Hagerstown.
Okay. Yeah.
So they live, and he's a Southwest pilot, but I met Dave and his buddies when they were Fairmont State students learning to fly years ago, and I took them through the military facility and stayed in touch with them. That you got to have some sort of a goal in life, and
sure,
too many kids don't have a goal,
mm-hmm.
which is, sometimes that's, one singular goal doesn't mean you're doomed, I don't believe.
Yeah. No, I agree, Dennis. And I've got a friend of mine here in our neighborhood, literally a stone's throw from my house, a guy named Leo Grenier. I mentioned to you briefly about the Civil Air Patrol.
Yes.
I would really love to, in fact, I'm talking to him about doing an interview, whether it's with him or somebody else in his Civil Air Patrol, because I'd love to link you guys up, because they've got, younger kids that are, already looking at potentially, be flight school and that kind of thing. Now, whereabouts in West Virginia, Dennis, if people could just get kind of a picture of where your flight school is at, could you kind of describe that?
Yes, the university is in Fairmont, West Virginia, which is just south of Morgantown.
Okay.
On the north-south interstate, I-79.
Sure.
So if you know where Morgantown is, south of Pittsburgh, we are about 28 miles south of the town of where WVU is.
Okay.
And
how many?
Go ahead.
How many total students are at the college?
I think we're running 3,400.
Okay.
It's a small school.
Mm-hmm.
It has a nursing program.
Okay. Give some of the other majors that they have there. Nursing, obviously, flight.
It's got nursing. It's got a teaching program, a really good education, for primary ed program that's done very well. It has a really good criminal justice program.
Okay.
It has a business program. We're linked up with a business school because we have an administrative degree, and so they've got a master in healthcare management now. That's a brand new master's program. Okay. It's a good little school. It's small. I know just about everyone. I know all of the hierarchy, including the president, first name basis.
Sure.
And it's a good little school.
Well, if people wanted to get a hold of you, Dennis, you're going to kind of wrap it up here momentarily. I do want you to stay on after, if we could.
Sure. Yeah.
If people wanted to get a hold of you or information as far as the college is concerned, could you give us that information?
Sure. You can reach me at D Elliot. That's ELLIOTT with the number 8 at Fairmont State, all one word. That's FAIRMONT state.edu. And that will reach my email.
Very good. Well, this has been fantastic. It's great to be able to catch up after all these years. And I really enjoyed my time up in Hancock, New York. I was up there for 20 years. It is a wonderful town, and you have some not only great memories up there, but still a lot of wonderful friends up there. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So
it's I haven't got back because of COVID.
Right.
But,
understandable.
I will mention some of the viewers that are from Hancock, or at least went to school there, would remember Mrs. Lester.
Oh yeah.
And she fell back in the fall and broke her femur. Mm-hmm. And she is laid up in a nursing home. Her husband Wellington passed away last year. Mm-hmm. just remember her in your prayer. She got me through math. Of course, I grew up right next to her, so
Right.
they were family to us over the years.
Yeah, wonderful people, Helen
They're
and
wonderful
Wellington.
people.
Yeah. Wellington was my principal when I first got up there.
That's
and
right.
He was, between he and Mr. Podbelski, they were the ones that foolishly or unfoolishly hired me up there. But anyway, it turned out.
Well, I think it was a good move on their part.
Well, I appreciate that, Dennis, because as I said, it's a wonderful town up there, wonderful school, wonderful memories. That's for sure. Yeah.
So please put the word out.
Yeah.
We're not just a flight school. We kind of take these kids under our arm, under our wing, and we really look out for them.
Well, when we get done with this, we'll be done with this shortly here, Dennis. What I always do is I always put it up on some of the different social media platforms, any contacts or connections you or your kids have with that, put it out there, then I try to tag other people, so they get to see it. We try to get the word around as much as possible. And again, as I said to you before, if you have some other people there at Fairmont that would like to do an interview, I'd be very open to doing it, and just see how it works, because I think there may be some things that maybe we can do together to see if we can further.
I think we could explore that. I think that's really possible. If I can get my partner Joel, he lives in a different county, and where he lives, he has no internet. So I would like to get all of us together, or at least maybe even get you down to do you could bring some of your young folks down and look at our program one day.
Sure. That'd be great.
A good motivator. I don't know if Pennsylvania has a reciprocal agreement, the common market agreement with West Virginia for aviation. I don't know if they have any collegiate aviation programs.
Yeah, that's something I wouldn't know.
So sometimes we do have students from Pennsylvania that come to us.
Great.
So we got a lot from Ohio. We got a lot from New Jersey, believe it or not.
Okay.
Anyway, what a wonderful thing you're doing. And I listened to Kevin Crane's interview and was really motivated. I agree with him. You got to you can't pull the rope. We call it pulling the rope up on your buddies.
Yeah.
On a rescue. You leave the rope down. And these young kids, young folks, I had a lot of help growing up, a lot of great mentors, and by George, we're gonna help these young folks out as long as
that's fantastic. And I appreciate it very much, Dennis. And just a reminder to anybody here, please, if you have not subscribed to my YouTube channel, Playing It Forward Coaching, Dennis and I kind of share some of the same things. We had some wonderful people mentoring us as we came up, and we're just trying to, as I said, that's why I refer to as Playing It Forward. So anyway, Dennis, this has been great. Please hang out here for a second. We'll chat right afterwards. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.